Hi, this is Mujtaba Al-Hilo, and I'm your instructor in the course of the 16th century poetry. And today we are going to talk about the most important categories of poetry in the 16th century. So, of course, there are so many types, so many categories in the poetry of this age, but I'm going to focus on the most important types which concern us in this course. So, I'm not going to take so much time of you. Please be patient. There are three broad categories of poetry in the 16th century, which are lyrical, narrative, and epic poetry. So, these three types were the dominant types. Of course, we have other types, other categories, other genres of poetry, but these three are the dominant one and were used so much in that age, in the Elizabethan age and in the 16th century. So let's go to the first one, which is lyrical poetry. Lyrical poetry is a form of poetry which expresses personal emotions or feelings, typically spoken in the first person. So, lyrical poetry, the concern of lyrical poetry, its appeal is the heart. It is the emotions. So we are talking about emotions. We are talking about heart. We are talking about feelings, and they try to investigate, to explore the inner layers of the heart, of the emotions. That's why these emotions are the distinct features of the 16th century, because as you all know, that the Elizabethan poetry was famous in its feelings, in its play, its role playing of emotions and feelings and what happens in the heart. That's why the main concern of lyrical poetry was the heart, the emotions, rather than the mind. Of course, we cannot say that mind had not any place in the poetry of the 16th century, but mostly they try to make some transition from the medieval ages and their poetry, because as you all know, that the medieval ages was so famous in the domination of the church, of the Bible. There were no real feelings, no real personal feelings. There was no individual feelings in the medieval ages and its poetry. That's why one of the main transitions, one of the main features, distinct features of the 16th century poetry is that they try to focus on the emotional side, on the personal, individual side of poetry and what happens in the heart. So that's why lyrical poetry was so creative in that age, and we have so many examples in the common lectures which I'm going to encounter. Mainly, for example, those poems, those great masterpieces by William Shakespeare. So let's go to the second part, to the second type category of the poetry in the 16th century, which is narrative poetry. And narrative poetry is a form of poetry that tells a story, often making the voices of a narrator and characters as well. The entire story is usually written in metered verse. Narrative poems do not need rhyme. The poems that make up this genre may be short or long, and the story it relates to may be complex. It is normally dramatic, with objectives diverse and meter. Narrative poetry. The main feature, the main characteristic of narrative poetry is that it tells a story. It has some characters, it has some narrators, it has some plot. This might be, I cannot really say for sure, but this is the beginning of the creation of the foundation of novel which officially appeared in 1745 in the 18th century. So narrative poetry might be the beginning, the preparation for that genre. Anyway, narrative poetry is a poetry that tells a story of some people, some characters, with some narrators, with some plot, with some themes, of course. And it doesn't need any rhyme, in fact, because they are mostly written in blank verse, which is a type of poetry which does not have any rhyme, which is written in iambic pentameter. So those poems might vary from long to short, and they from time to time we find some conflict, we find some climax in the narrations, and we find some resolutions to those problems. So anyway, narrative poetry was another dominant form in the 16th century poetry, and they played it so well, those poets, sorry. And the third type, which is of great importance, is epic. And epic is a long narrative poem which is usually related to heroic deeds of a person of an unusual courage and unparalleled bravery. In order to depict this bravery and courage, the epic uses the most sophisticated style. Look, epic has a very long story. It has undergone through a very long journey, literary journey. The beginning, one of the first, or I can say the first English epic is Beowulf. It appeared in the 7th century, and it is about the story of some heroes that lived in Europe or in England, and he had some great stories, and he fought with some monsters at that time, and of course it has its own features. So that long journey and the evolutions that it had undergone, now we have some new features in the epic in the 16th century, and it's most of the time, or one of the main features of epic, is that it tells a story of some heroes, and normally it is about the history of a nation. It's about the history of a complete nation, and it tries to focus on the bravery of those figures, because those figures, those legends, mostly we have legends, we do not have real characters in epics. Those legends try to reflect the greatness of that nation. That's why epic poetry always try to reflect those great deeds of those characters, and they are mostly written in sophisticated style. So these three types were the dominant forms, the dominant genres at that time in the 16th century. And of course we will highlight more examples of these three types in the coming lectures. So as for lyrics, there are four main types that undergo this category: sonnet, song, blank verse, sorry, there is a spelling mistake, it is a blank verse, and we have madrigal. So again, sorry for this mistake, it is blank verse, okay? So let's move on to the first one, which is sonnet, and the most important genre in the poetry of the 16th century, because some literary theorists, they call the 16th century as the age of the sonnet. So because it reached its peak, its climax in this age, in the Renaissance. So the word sonnet, it is derived from the Italian word sonetto, which means a little song or small lyric. In poetry, a sonnet has 14 lines and is written in iambic pentameter. Each line has 10 syllables. It has a specific rhyme scheme and a volta, or a specific turn. So originally it was borrowed from Italy, and by the way, we are in March, and unfortunately we are witnessing the acceleration of the epidemic of COVID-19 in Italy, and we are seeing the statistics of the death of people is rising, and that's very unfortunate. My wishes and my prayers go to Italy and its nice, sophisticated, educated people, and to all the world. I hope that this epidemic will end so soon. So let's go back to sonnet, and sonnet was borrowed from Italy. In the coming lectures, we are going to focus and explore the history of sonnet in more detail. And the meaning of sonnet is that it is a little song, which is, of course, 14 lines. So no less, no more. 14 lines is one of the main feature of sonnet. And it is, of course, written in iambic pentameter, and it belongs to lyrics. It's a lyric, okay? So the main appeal of sonnet is the heart, the emotions, and that's why we see the fall of sonnet in the next age, in the age of reason, because those poets try to focus more on the mind rather than the heart, and that's why we do not see that the glimmer of sonnet in the age of reason. So sonnet, the main purpose and the main goal of sonnet is to talk to the heart, is to go straight to your heart, to the heart of the reader, and plays with the emotions of the audience. The second type of lyric is song, and a song is a lyrical poem which is sung with the playing of some musical instrument. It is a very old form of literature which is passed from one generation to the other generation. Song, you all know what is a song, and it doesn't need to be explained in detail, because maybe every day we spend some time, maybe some hours, listening to songs, and it is one of the most ancient genres in literature, and it is still surviving. For example, today we might rarely find sonnets, but songs, they are everywhere, in every phone, every house, every laptop. So we always encounter song, and we know those characteristics, the famous characteristics and features of song. And of course, they are sung with some musical instruments, unlike madrigals, which we are going to explain in a minute. The next one is a blank verse. A blank verse is a literary device defined as unrhyming verse written in iambic pentameter. In poetry and prose, it has a consistent meter with 10 syllables in each line, pentameter, where unstressed syllables are followed by stressed ones, 5 of which are stressed but do not rhyme. It is known as unrhymed iambic pentameter. So blank verse was mainly used in plays. For example, Shakespeare mainly depended on blank verse in writing his plays, his great masterpieces like Hamlet, like Twelfth Night, because the writer finds some freedom, some space to explain his emotions. Because when you try to write in sonnets, you are so chained and jailed with the rhyming scheme. You should follow some procedures, some rhyming scheme. That's why you do not have that freedom, that space to express your emotions, your ideas. You should undergo that jail, that chain of rhyme. While in blank verse, you are free. You do not need to follow any procedure, any rhyming scheme. That's why you have more freedom to express your ideas, your emotions, your feelings. So poets always prefer blank verse when they try to write long poems, like in plays and in other genres. And the next one is madrigal. Madrigal is a secular part sung without instrumental accompaniment, usually for 4 to 6 voices, making abundant use of contrapuntal imitation, popular especially in the 16th and 17th centuries. So madrigal, I remember one of the most lovely madrigals I've ever heard was in The Hobbit, in The Lord of the Rings, the new trilogy, which was filmed, I think, in 2012. And at the end, you hear that madrigal, some voices, the voice of maybe 4 to 5 people. They are singing together without any instruments. They are amazing. So you may find different madrigals, amazing madrigals. They are sung with humming, without any musical instrument, and of course they try to appeal to the heart. They try to fill the void of that music, those instruments, with the power of words. That's why we find that they invest in madrigals. The writers of madrigals try to investigate so much in the power of the words, to make you forget about the absence, the void of music. So these are the most important and the most beautiful types of lyrics in the 16th century. And of course, we are going to continue in the coming lectures about the origins of sonnet, the types of sonnet, and other related matters and issues and subjects which are found in the poetry of the 16th century. Thank you very much. Keep tuned.